I'd like to devote the time today to speaking about writing that has come out of the pandemic. It's especially relevant and of great interest. As many of you know, what I do for a living is help kids get into the colleges of their dreams. And this year, the Common App has introduced in an unprecedented move an essay devoted entirely to a student's response to COVID. I'll read you the prompt. It is, the COVID-19 pandemic has disrupted the lives and post-secondary plans for many students. We want to reduce anxiety for applicants affected by these events and provide them with a way to share their experience with colleges and universities. Next year, on the 2021 application, Common App will provide students who need it with a dedicated space to elaborate on the impact of the pandemic, both personally and academically. And the question is actually, community disruptions such as COVID-19 and natural disasters can have deep and long-lasting impacts. If you need it, this space is yours to describe those impacts. Colleges care about the effects on your health and well-being, safety, family circumstances, future plans, and education, including access to reliable technology and quiet study spaces. Please use this space to describe how these events have impacted you. The word limit is 250. So this is an unprecedented move by the Common App to include another question, a supplementary question. The question is optional, but we always do optional essays because it's another opportunity to for the colleges to get to know the student and the student to present him or herself to the colleges. This one is particularly important because we're all impacted by this, and how a student responds or how a student's been impacted is going to be very significant in deciding where they want to go from the point of view of the student and from the point of view of admissions, in getting a real window into what's happened in that student's life and how it's impacted that particular student and how that student has chosen to respond to it. So everyone that I'm working with, we're going to do the COVID supplement. I recommend it to everyone. It's a great opportunity, and we're steeped in this environment where it's the overarching, most significant thing that's happening in history all around the world. It's a global experience. And actually, in keeping with that, when I've had students begin writing about it, they've often written about the elements that are very common to a lot of the students, which are they're sheltering in place, they're wearing masks, they haven't gone to class, they're doing remote learning, they're not sure what's going to happen next year. All those things are widespread. They're pretty much everybody's experience. So to say, I miss my friends, I feel bored, I wish I was back in school, or I'm so glad I'm not in school, but there are drawbacks. Those kinds of things are sort of what everybody is going through. So when I'm working with students, I'm trying to get them to dig deep and really get in touch with the elements of this experience that are unique to them, and to kind of slow down time and have them look in to see how this has affected them. What I have recommended to students is, because it's a rapidly changing situation, that they hold off a bit on writing an essay or thinking about writing the essay, the COVID supplement, and rather do preliminary things like write a timeline of when did you first hear about it, when did school stop, when were there events, were you tested, did you get sick, did somebody get sick, were there events that happened that affected you that you can trace the development of. So that would be one element. Also to keep a COVID journal. I know that students of mine have said they've had dreams, and it's entered into them so deeply, for reflections, because it's impossible to ignore that while you may not be sick, other people are, and while you may be alive and well, there's been hundreds of thousands of deaths already in the world as a result of this pandemic. So there's just a feeling of a kind of a ghostly feeling that a lot of people experience, and even to tune into elements of that. So to keep a COVID journal, to do a timeline for events and how they've affected you. And also I suggested that they read what's written about it, which I always suggest in college essays. Read model essays. It's going to be really helpful to you. However, it's so early in the process that there's very little written on it, and certainly there's no college essays written on it yet. In keeping with that, I did want to say that I'm going to be publishing an anthology of college essays, COVID supplement college essays, and we'll be calling for submissions probably in August, and I'll let you know about that as it unfolds, and that's going to be really exciting as well. Finally, to read what's written on it. So there isn't really anything written on it, except that I did find an anthology that has been edited by Alice Quinn. Alice Quinn was an editor, longtime editor of The New Yorker. I actually had a personal correspondence with her, which resulted in her publishing one of my poems in 1995 in The New Yorker. And she's since retired, but she put together an anthology called Together in a Sudden Strangeness, America's Poets Respond to the Pandemic. That came out a few weeks ago, I think, and it's only available on Kindle. And I was able to, I got it, I clicked, I downloaded it, and I've been using that as a way to help students get deeper in terms of their own experience, instead of just writing, I'm doing remote learning and I get bored when I'm doing these Zooms and so forth. So what I've done is I'm compiling sort of suggestions based on the poems from this book, Together in a Sudden Strangeness. And I thought I would share a few of these today and speak about the elements that, you'll see some common elements, which is interesting too, because these poets didn't speak to each other. They're just in the environment, in the world, responding to what's happening. But there are common elements. And I found it really useful to read these poems. They're short, but they're kind of slices of experience, to read these poems to students as a way of opening them to a deeper experience, or their own deeper experience of what's going on. So I'm going to read a few of these. I'll probably comment either while I'm doing it or after. They're really beautiful, and it is quite a moment in history, because these only came out on Kindle because it's too soon to publish a hardcover or paperback. And you will be one of the first people, hearing these poems. Eventually I'm hoping that my students will be writing essays that will eventually be published in a book of student essays on COVID-19. Here's a poem by Edward Hirsch, famous poet. 8 People, it's called. 8 people died on my block in Brooklyn last week, and I didn't know what it meant to be living at one remove from each other, wary, isolated, locked up, with the relentless bad news, while ambulances cruised the neighborhood, which was otherwise so calm and quiet that I wondered if God, too, had gone into hiding and sheltered in place. I think I'm just going to read a few of these, because I think when I read them, you're going to see some similarities thematically. And it's really beautiful to see just how people are responding. This is by Julie Guez. It's called If Indeed I Am Ill, Brother. Tell me about London, the weather there, in spring outside the walls of the Great Hall. These things matter less to me than the sound of your summary, shadows cast on the watery surfaces of my mind by invisible fingers whose energy is everything, as you know. These sonatas, these scores, tell me what of them will last when everything falls away. I know it's they come kind of quickly if you're not actually reading them. But I'm just going to keep reading a few of these because I think in the process of reading it, you'll kind of get a sense of how people are thinking about what's going on. This one's called Corona Diary. It's by Cornelius Eady, wonderful poet I worked with many, many years ago. Really interesting thematic thread in this one. These days, you want the poem to be a mask, soft veil between what floats invisible, but known in the air. These days, you want the poem to be a mask, soft veil between what floats invisible, but known in the air. You've just read that there's a singer you love who might be breathing their last, and wish the poem could travel, unintrusive as poems do, from the page to the brain, a fan's medicine. Those of us who are lucky enough to stay indoors with a salary count the days by press conference. For others, there is always the dog and the park and the dog. A relative calls, "How you doin'? Are you a ghost?" The buds emerge on time for their brief duty. The poem longs to be a filter, but in floats spring's insistence. We wait. I find this one really, really interesting in the metaphor of wishing that the poem could be, these days you want the poem to be a mask, and the poem longs to be a filter, to somehow help protect us from the invisible, obviously the virus. But it's interesting because the invisible is also God, the invisible is faith, the invisible is hope, and the invisible are the germs that we can't see. And to be aware of the invisible, it's a beautiful thing. It's a kind of awakening, but of course, because it's invisible, it's also scary. So as if the poem could be a mask and the poem could be a filter, but in floats spring's insistence. We wait. There's another one I'm going to finish with. This is by Forrest Gander. Really interesting. I don't know if you'll be able to see it if I hold it up, but there's asterisks, little stars between phrases, and it has the effect of being like particles in the air. And it's a really beautiful poem too. I'll speak a little bit after about how these could be used for inspiration, but I find them very inspiring myself. This is called Abad, which is dawn. And again, I guess I'll read it in a way as if I could embody the asterisks, so that there's kind of a pause and there's like a snowflake or a particle that divides, that's present in the pauses. I suppose in a way like the virus is present, but we can't see it in the pauses in the air. So I'll try to read it with the asterisks if that's even possible. This is a really beautiful poem. Can you hear dawn edging close here? Soft light with its vacuum fingertips, gripping the bedroom wall, an understated, what? Exhilaration? Can you hear the voices, if they can be called voices, of towhees, scratching in the garden, and then the creaky, low, husky voice flecked with sleep beside you in bed, telling a dream slowly as though in real time, and now interrupting that dream. Can you make out the voice, if it can be called a voice, of absence speaking intimately to you, directly, using the names of those who were vulnerable, who have gone? I know you must. hear it feelingly, a low vibration in your bones. For don't you find yourself absorbed in a next moment beyond your given life? I find these move me to tears almost. So in working with students, I'm trying to get them to slow down and feel into this kind of incredible moment in history, and to feel one's presence in it, and to express it uniquely, just as Forrest Gander did with those asterisks. And when you're reading the poem again is Aubade Forrest Gander, and the book Alice Quinn edited is Together in a Sudden Strangeness, America's Poets Respond to the Pandemic, if you want to take a look at it. But to be able to express uniquely your experience of this invisible threat, the separation of people, and yet the connection we all have because we're all vulnerable to this invisible threat. And, I'm so grateful that she put this anthology together, to be able to read in real time while it's happening, the expression of people trying to make sense of their lives and of the deaths and the invisible, the presence of the invisible among us. I just find so beautiful and moving, and that's what I'm trying to help students get in touch with in writing these essays, because anybody can say, oh, I'm doing, remote learning, and I sit in front of the computer, and it's boring, and, that's not very interesting. But to actually slow down and feel yourself, the presence of yourself, the fact that you're alive, to perceive what's going on in this moment. I guess that's for everybody, not just for students on their way to college, but just to pause for a moment. So there will be much more that comes out on this subject. I'm sure of it, and I'm excited to gather the essays, the COVID supplements of students who are applying to college and have been given this opportunity to express themselves in this way. So thanks for listening again, and stay well, stay safe, and I'm sure I'll be back reading more of these and talking about what I do and what I love to do.